Hello everyone, and welcome to this video tutorial from BlenderCookie.com. My name is Jonathan Williamson, and today I'm going to introduce you to some of the basics of character rigging in Blender 2.6. This is going to include setting up the basic biped rig, including some IK setups, a couple of drivers, and then just the general basic functionality of a biped rig here. And I have this rig created beforehand that I'm going to take you through how to create, and we're also using a base character model that was downloaded from BlendSwap done by Blender Player. You can grab it from blendswap.com/3d-model/author/blender_player. Very nice little base mesh that he's got here. You know, it's got good poly distribution, nice and clean, and works really well for what we want to do. So with our rig here, we've got the ability to do a good few things. One, we've got the ability to just move the entire thing around, leaving the feet in place. We have the ability to, just rotate the hips. We can go in, rotate the torso, arms, shoulders. The arms and legs both have IKs set up such that we can just grab a single bone, move that arm around, and just have the hand and such follow. This includes the foot and the arms. Each one of the arms and legs also have a pull target setup, so you can adjust the knee or elbow position as needed. And then there's a couple other things that I've done on this. For one is the fact that the hips just allow you to rotate like this, but also the ability to just use a little slider here on the right side to just turn off whether the hands are going to follow the hip location or not. And so if we just take this and flip it on right here, you can see now that they follow, and then now they don't. And so this gives you a little extra functionality. You've also got the ability to turn whether the head will follow the neck rotation or not. So currently it does not, but then if we select the head, go over here and set the influence to 1 on our copy rotation constraint, now it actually follows. So these are some of the things that we're going to be looking at, how to set up from scratch. We're going to be starting with just a raw rig and building it up from scratch. So let's get started. Okay, so I have my character model here and I'm ready to start creating the rig. What we want to do is we're just going to hit Shift A, add in a new armature and a single bone. This allows us just to start off the armature. This first bone that we add is going to be the root bone. The root bone is the bone that allows us to just grab it and move the entire armature or the entire character without deforming anything. So, the arms follow, the feet follow, everything follows, and allows us just to move the character around the scene. So we're going to go ahead, now that we've added the arm, or the armature, we're going to hit Tab to go into Edit Mode. And the first thing that I want to do is you'll notice that the tip of my bone here is the tip right here, and then here is the tail, or the root. So what I want to do is just grab the tip, as it's actually selected by default, and using my snapping set to increment snapping, I'm just going to hit G, hold down Control to activate the snapping, and just pull it out something like this, just so that it's perfectly flat along the ground plane. And this will just represent basically the floor of the scene, which is also lined up with the bottom of the feet of the character. So it just makes it very easy to position the character within the scene. And let's go ahead and name these as we go along. So this one here is going to be our root bone. So we'll just name it root. And I'm going to go ahead and hit Shift D to duplicate this bone. I'm just going to pull it right up to the root, be about the bottom of the pelvis. I'll grab the tip, I'm going to rotate it up and put it right about the belly button line. Okay? And then let's go ahead, and just to make this easier to see, let's go over to the armature properties here. And we're going to enable X-ray. X-ray just allows us to see the bone through anything that's in front of it, just so that it's always visible. And now we're going to go and hit E to extrude. And we're just going to pull it up right to about the bottom of the pectoral line, and then we'll extrude that one more time. And so these are going to create our 3 spine bones. So let's actually go ahead and name these. This first one we're going to go ahead and name as the hips. And in fact, just to make this easy, rather than naming them from here, we can also just name them from the outliner. So if we bring this row down a little bit, toggle down the armature, and then the armature 001, and then here's the root. Here's root 0.01, root 0.002. We can just rename these real quick by hitting Control and left clicking. So this will be hips. This then will be spine 0.01. And this then will be spine 0.02. And so you can see these consecutively. So it's hips, spine 01, spine 02. Okay, now I want to go ahead and extrude this up a little bit more. We're going to go ahead and extrude the neck. So selecting the tip, we're going to hit E to extrude, take it up, and then one more time I'll take it straight up along the Z-axis by hitting E and then Z to lock it to the Z-axis so I can't move it left or right. I'm just going to take it right up to the top of the head. These will be named as neck and head consecutively, just like that. Okay, so you can see our hierarchy here where it goes hips, spine, neck, and head. And this then gives us the basic chain of our armature for the main body. Currently, if we grab any of these, we're able to move the bones around, but just so that you become familiar with the way that this works, in the case that you're not already, let's go ahead and hit Control Tab, which will switch us over into pose mode. With armatures, we have object mode, edit mode, and pose mode. Edit mode obviously allows us to create and edit the armature, while pose mode allows us to animate it or pose it. Within pose mode, we can now grab any one of the bones, and you notice if we grab, say, the hips bone, which is then the parent of all the other bones, it rotates all the others. But then if we grab, say, one in the middle, only the ones above it in the chain follow it, not the ones below it. So this allows us, it just creates this hierarchical list of bones such that, any children of other bones will follow their parents. Okay, let's go ahead and go back in edit mode to create the rest of our basic rig. So first, let's go ahead and create one side. So I'm going to just grab this bone. I'm just going to hit Shift D to duplicate it. This bone is then going to be basically my shoulder bone. So I'm just going to rotate it around and actually position it such that it basically forms the same basic shape as the clavicle, where the clavicles are coming out through and around in here. So we're just going to basically mimic that same shape. So we'll pull this in just a little bit, pull this one over. Let's switch to side view, just make sure that it's lined up with our mesh. That looks good. We can now select this one, and we're just going to name this as shoulder.L, so for left. Because since we're going to have, this is going to be duplicated over to the other side, we want these to be named the same such that anything that we do, we're able to basically mirror across or just have a good naming convention. Now we can go and select the tip of this, and we're going to extrude once down to the elbow, and then again down to the wrist, and then once down to the middle of the hand. Now on the hand, we're not going to be creating any finger rigs today. I'm going to leave that for a tutorial of its own, but we will create a basic hand rig so that you can actually go ahead and move the hand around. Now with each of these, let's go ahead and name them consecutively. So again, this one is going to be arm_upper.L, and you can name these really any way that you want. The main thing is that you name them consistently and you name them appropriate for left and right. This then will be arm_lower.L, and then this will be hand.L. Okay, looking good. Let's go and do the same thing now for the legs. So for the legs, I'm just going to grab my hips bone here. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate it. I'm going to rotate it around, put it right about up in here for the hips. Bring this one down for the knee. Extrude once down for the ankle. Move it back along the side view to fit within the rig. And then let's go ahead and extrude this once down for the foot and once again for the toes. Okay, so we can then go ahead and name these ones as well. So this is going to be, we can actually do this in the outliner. Sometimes it's a little bit easier. Okay, so this one, or this one here, is going to be leg_upper.L. This then is leg_lower.L. This will be our foot.L. And this one will be our toe.L. Okay, so now if we hit tab to go into tab to leave edit mode, which Blender actually memorizes whether you've been last in pose mode or object mode, such that if I go ahead and switch to object mode, hit tab to go into edit mode, hit tab again, it'll take me back to object mode. But if I switch to pose mode and then hit tab and tab again, it brings me back to pose mode. And so it just makes it real quick and easy since, people often, when you're working with a rig, you're going to be switching in and out of pose mode a lot, but you're very seldom going to be using object mode when building the rig. This just makes it very quick and easy to do what you need to do. Okay, so this is the basis of our rig. Before we go on to actually add in the extra functionality and things like that, I first want to go ahead and mirror this across. So let's create the other side. So let's hit tab to go into edit mode. Let's select this whole right side, about like this. And with the cursor centered here at the origin, in the case that it's not, just press Shift-C, that will recenter the origin. We're going to press period to switch the pivot point to around the 3D cursor, or you can choose the menu down here. And then we're going to hit Shift, or oops, got to select the clavicle as well. I'm going to hit Shift-D, right click, and then let's go ahead and mirror this, and which we can do by going to Armature, and there should be mirror around the X local. There we go, and it just mirrors it right across. Oops. Do this again. X local, and then left click. There we go. Okay, so that's mirrored across now, and we're ready to basically go ahead and set up our rig. But something that you'll notice, when we mirror this across, now each one of these are set to .L001. So what we want to do is rename all these. Well, we don't really want to just go in and rename them one by one. That would just be obnoxious. So Blender has a tool built in that when you've already set up your naming convention with .R or .L, it can automatically detect that that signifies the left side or the right side. And so we can actually just go and hit W with these selected and flip names. And that will just remove the .001 and rename the L to an R. And some of you may have been wondering actually why I didn't use the X mirror options under Armature, which allows us to extrude from multiple sides at once. And this is exactly why, because if I'd done that, I still would have had to rename each one of these individually, but I would have had to rename both sides, because as soon as you rename one bone, the link between them for flipping names left and right is automatically broken. And so we would have had to name all of them rather than only half of them. So that's why I didn't do that this time. Okay, so we have our basic rig. And this right now is what's called our deform rig. These are all of the bones that are going to actively deform the character and, you know, deform it as far as the posing and things like that. Any other bone we add from here on out is only going to be basically a extra controller, an animation bone, or something else to basically add additional functionality to the rig. So I want to go ahead and assign the rig to the character now before we go any further. This way it just goes ahead and sets up all of the vertex groups. The vertex groups are basically groups that select, or groups of vertices that have the identical name to the bone, to allowing Blender to understand what vertices are attached to what bones. So in order to do that, we're going to parent the character to the bones. But before we do that, actually, we need to do one thing, and that is the root bone is the one exception in that it's not a deform bone. We don't want it actually deforming any of the mesh. It's strictly here to move everything else around. So what we need to do is select it, and in the bone properties here, you just want to scroll down and uncheck deform right here. This just allows, or tells Blender that when we parent the character to the rig, it won't take into consideration this bone when creating the vertex groups to control the bones, or to control the mesh. So let's just uncheck deform. Now all the others still have deform checked. So now we can go ahead and hit Control Tab to leave pose mode, and we're going to select the rig, and then Shift right click to select, or we're going to select the character, and then Shift right click to select the armature. And then in order to parent it, we want to go ahead and parent the character to the rig with what are called automatic weights. This basically just says that Blender is going to try and calculate the weights to understand what part of the mesh should be assigned to what bone as best as it can. And it works for a simple character like this. It actually works really well. So all we're going to do is we're going to hit Control P, set parent to the armature deform with automatic weights. So we'll just choose automatic weights. And now if we select the character and go over to the modifiers, you notice we now have an armature modifier in here. And if we go over to the vertex data, you notice we now have a vertex group for each and every deformation bone. If we go ahead and select the rig now and hit Control Tab to go into pose mode, grab any one of the bones, you can see we can now move our character. Very, very cool. And you'll notice that everything is actually moving pretty much the way that it should, just because it's a very simple character and it works pretty well. You know, with this kind of pretty simple topology. It's able to detect what's what pretty easily. And in today's tutorial, I'm not going to cover too much as far as cleaning up any of the deformations. You know, if we move the arm up, we can see some of this down here is probably following a bit too much. And that's where you would use what's called weight painting to basically clean up what vertices are assigned to what bones. I'm going to save that for another tutorial, maybe as a follow-up one to this. Because today I want to just focus on creating the actual rig. So the automatic weights are going to work well for now. Alright, so we've got this all built, but it doesn't have any of the additional functionality that I showed you in the beginning. We're not able to just swing the hips, we can't toggle the hands on and off, we can't just grab a bone here around the arms or the legs and move the entire thing with the IK chains, and we're not able to isolate the head. So we've got some definite things to resolve. First of all, you may have just noticed with the last bone that I selected, when I do this, it's definitely not behaving right. This should move the entire upper torso. Well, what I need to do is I need to change where these two bones are parented to, because these are what are controlling the shoulders. So if I hit tab to go into edit mode, you'll notice if we go into the bone properties and select one of these, that it's currently parented to spine 001, which is this bone here. If we rotate this, you'll notice the entire torso moves. But if we rotate this, it does not. So what we just need to do is we just need to move the parent of these bones to this bone. So if we go into tab, go into edit mode, select both of these, then shift right click to select this one and hit Control P, we can make the parent. But what we want to do is we want to keep the offset. If we choose connected, then these are going to connect their tail or the root of the bone to the tip of the previous bone or of the parent bone, which we don't want to do. So we want to hit Control Z to undo that. We're going to hit Control P and keep offset. This way it keeps the bones where they are, but still parents it. So now if I rotate this, it all works just fine. Okay, and we also want to go ahead and start by parenting the legs to the hips, because currently I can grab this, and that's obviously not quite what we want. That gets some definite stretching in there that's not quite ideal. So let's select both leg bones, and then select the hips, and we'll hit Control P and keep offset. So now if I rotate this, everything rotates, and we're pretty much good to go. All right, let's start by creating the IK chains for the arms. The IKs are a lot of fun, and they're really easy to set up. So there's two different ways we can do IKs. One is a very temporary solution, which while in pose mode, if we just bring up our toolbar and choose Auto IK, we can grab any bone and then just kind of move it around, and Blender automatically tries to determine how the IK should work and what it's going to do. Obviously, this gets all kinds of funky results. It's quite cool, but really not quite what we want. No one's leg really bends like that, and it doesn't bend like that very well. So this is not what we want. But this is, Auto IK is kind of cool if you're working with an FK rig or a forward kinematics versus inverse kinematics for IK. It can be helpful every now and then, if you don't want to just quickly use the IK and then turn it off. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a real IK. The way that a real IK works, or basically what's required for it to work, is it needs a separate bone that's not attached to the actual chain to use as the IK target. And then that IK constraint, as it's called, or it is a bone constraint, is added to an additional bone. So in this case, we're going to add a IK constraint. We can just choose Add Constraint, and we want Inverse Kinematics. We're going to add it to the forearm bone here. And immediately it's asking for a target. Well, the target is going to be our armature, or actually a bone within the armature. So we'll first choose armature, and then we need to choose a bone. Well, we don't have any bones to use right now, because if we could go ahead and use, say, the hand bone, maybe hand.l, but this creates all kinds of weird problems, because what you should be able to do with the IKs, you should be able to then grab that target and just hit G to grab it and have it work. But it's clearly not. If we grab the actual IK bone, then we get all kinds of weird things. So what we need to do is we need to set the target to an additional bone that's not connected. So the way that we're going to do this, we're going to hit tab, go into edit mode. Let's go and choose X-axis mirror for a moment, because then I'm just going to select this tip. I'm going to hit E to extrude, and by setting the X-axis mirror, it's extruded from both sides here. And now I can take this bone, I'm going to hit Alt-P and disconnect the bone. So that means I want to clear the parent of the bone. This way it disconnects it so it's no longer connected, and it removes any parenting. So this then is going to be my IK bone. So let's go ahead and rename this. So this one is going to be our arm underscore ik dot L. This one is going to be our arm underscore ik dot R. And now if I set this as the target by selecting this bone, notice it's turned yellow because of the constraint, go over to the constraints panel and choose the bone, I can now set this to arm ik dot L. And now if I grab this, hey, check it out, it's sort of starting to work, but you'll notice that it's moving the entire character. Well, this is because the chain is, or the chain length, which you can see is the value right here, is set to 0. So it's just going all the way back as far as it can. So it's, choosing its parent, and then the next parent, next parent, next parent, next parent, until there's no longer a parent to continue going back to, because this bone currently doesn't have a parent. So what we want to do is actually just set the parent up into the last joint of the arm that we want affected by the IK, which in this case is this bone here. So we're going to set the chain length to 1, goes to itself. So now if I grab this, I can go like this. And then if I set it to 2, I can now grab this bone and I can move the entire arm. Very, very cool. But you will notice some problems. For one, I can no longer rotate this bone like this. And now, what do I want to do? Like if I want to go up like this, but maybe I want his elbow up here, well, I can rotate this, but that just gets kind of messy. So this is where what's called the IK target comes into play. And the pole target is what it's called, and you can find it here. However, we're not going to use the pole target for today. There appears to be a problem in 2.60 that I've been trying to work through with Jason Van Gumster on figuring out what's going on with these, but there seems to be a problem with them, whether it's a bug or bad functionality, whatever it is. We're not going to use it. Instead, we're going to use basically it's kind of a hack, but basically an alternate way to do it by using a second IK. And I'm just going to reset the location of the bones here. Okay, so if you want to reset the bones, you just select everything, hit Alt-R to reset the rotation, and Alt-G to reset the location. What I can do now is I'm going to set up an IK to this bone. And so let's grab the elbow. We're going to extrude it out. And again, we're going to hit Alt-P, clear the parent, and then move it back. You'll notice it's done the same thing to the other side. Now, since this is a target, I'm not going to use this for actually moving the arm like this. Instead, I'm just going to use it for directing the elbow. So for the targets, we generally want them spread a little further out or a little further away because it gives us a little bit more accuracy. And as we start to build it, you'll maybe understand a little bit more why. But what we want to do now is set up the IK to this one. There's a really easy way to do that. Rather than going in here, adding an inverse schematic, setting it to armature, then choosing the bone and doing all that. Instead, we can simply select the IK bone, which actually we need to go ahead and name. This is going to be our arm underscore elbow underscore IK dot L. And we can just hit Control C to copy that and Control V to paste it there. And then change this over to .R. There we go. Instead, we can just select this bone, shift right click to select this one, and then we're going to hit Shift I and choose Active Bone. Okay, that sets the IK. If we go over the constraints panel now, we can just choose the chain length to be 1, brings everything back to normal, and now I can grab this. Everything seems to work great. Move this around, but now if I want to change the elbow position, I just grab this one, and I can move it around to kind of point the elbow. So this helps just correct the problems with control that you otherwise wouldn't get from the IK. So let's do this on both sides. So I'll select this one, Shift I, Active Bone, chain length to 2, this one, Shift I, chain length of 1. And now I have my IK arms set up. Fantastic. All right, let's save our file. And now let's do the same thing with the legs. So with the legs, I'm first going to extrude out from the knee. I'm going to remove the parent of that knee bone. And I'm going to go ahead and name this as leg underscore knee underscore IK dot L. I'll copy that, select this one, paste it, and then I can just go and hit W and say flip names, and that will correct it. I'm going to do the same thing then down here, extrude this out. This time I'm going to leave it right where it's at because this is going to be my actual controller bone. I'm going to hit Alt-P, clear the parent, change the name to be leg underscore IK dot L, copy this, and paste it, and hit W and flip names. Okay, then I can set up my IK, so I'll select first the target, then the IK bone, and I'll hit Shift I, add the constraint, and go over to the constraints panel, change the chain length to 2, I'm going up to the hip, and then I'll do the same thing here, Shift I, chain length of 1, Shift I, chain length of 1, and Shift I, active bone, chain length of 2. There we go. So you can see that IKs can do some kind of funky things until you fix them otherwise. So now you'll notice that this actually appears to be doing some funky things as well, maybe. Oh, you know what? No, what we need to do, here's why we moved the targets a little further out. You'll notice that, if I just reset this, acts fine, and then it starts to get a little wonky, kind of goes off to the side. And basically, the IK target, or the knee, is going above the IK target and is making it all kinds of funky stuff. So what we're going to do is we're just going to move these out a little further like this, such that the IK bone is almost always pointing at the target rather than going beyond it. All right, there we go. So that solves that. We're able to move the foot, do things like that. Something that we may want to do, though, is you'll notice now if I grab the hip bone, I can now just kind of rotate this around, or I can move the whole thing around. But you'll notice that our feet are not staying on the ground. So what we want to do is we're going to select these bones now. We're going to go over to the bone properties, and we've got the ability to determine whether the bone is connected, if it inherits location from its parent, if it inherits a scale, or the location of its parent. What we want to do is just turn off the rotation. When we turn off the rotation, now grab this bone, you'll notice that the foot stays on the ground. So let's do that with both of them. Okay, so now he stays on the ground. I can do all this. Fantastic. And at this point, I've actually got a workable rig that I could go in and actually pose with. Very, very cool. Now, we might want to do a few things, obviously, because he's got some things to do, but it's already pretty much working. But one of the very common things that you want to be able to do in animation, particularly doing a walk cycle, is you want to be able to swing his hips. Well, currently, if we try and swing his hips, this is what happens. Not ideal. So we want to do two things. Number one, we want to make it so that his hands no longer follow his hips unless we specify it. And we want to be able to rotate just his hips, leaving his torso in place. So let's start with that one, because I think that's the more important one. So let's go ahead and hit Tab to go into edit mode. And the way that we're going to do this is basically by adding in a second controller bone. So this is not a deformation bone. And in fact, none of the IK bones are either. So really, we should go in here and select all the IK bones and disable the deform option. I'm not going to do that just yet. We can kind of do that as cleanup work. Since we've already applied all of our vertex groups with the modifier and such, we don't really need to worry about that. But if you were creating this all in one step and then we're going to apply your automatic weights, you would need to be sure that all of the bones that aren't supposed to deform are unchecked, because otherwise they would create vertex groups and contribute to the deformation of your character, which you don't want. Okay, so let's go ahead now and set up the hip swing. So the way this is going to work is basically we're going to select this bone, we're going to duplicate it, and then flip the direction, because what we basically want to do is we want a bone that is going to rotate around this point such that it can rotate like this with my very crappy hand-drawn arrows. All right, let's just remove those before we get too embarrassed. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to select this bone, we're going to hit Shift D, and then what we could do is we could just go and rotate this, but instead let's just hit W and switch directions, or just press Alt F. So this then gives us a bone that we're able to rotate like this. So you can imagine the hips swinging back and forth right through there. So, but this has a problem. A, this isn't a deformed bone. This is going to be our hips underscore root bone. We now need this bone to follow this bone. So let's first start by setting up the parenting. So let's go into edit mode, select this bone, then select this bone and hit Control P and make parent, and we'll go ahead and connect it. So now this bone actually follows, so that's all fine and dandy. But what we need to do is we need to select this bone and let's turn off the inherent rotation. So now if I rotate this, just the hips rotate, and there we go. Very, very cool. It works well, and by doing that kind of double trick allows or the switchback allows us to get that extra rotation in there. But now you may notice, well, what if we want to just bend his entire torso sideways? Well, we could go like this and then rotate him down. Or if we wanted, we could go ahead and say, let's have this bone copy a little bit of the rotation of this bone. So if we want to rotate him all the way down, we can go like this, and this bone then would go ahead and follow as well. So this would make it really easy to make him lean to his side. Well, the way that we would do this is we would select this bone and then this bone, hit Control Shift C to bring up our Add Constraints with Targets option. And we'll just choose Copy Rotation. So the copy rotation is copying the rotation of this bone. Now you notice that some funky stuff has happened here. So let's go over to the Constraints panel and first off set this to be local space and local space. So this way it's determining that rotation within its own space. Now if I rotate this, you'll notice that it's kind of rotating in the opposite direction. Well, let's figure out why is it rotating in the opposite direction, because if I rotate this, then this one should just rotate more like that, but it's not. So let's hit tab to go into edit mode, and my guess is that this has to do with the axes. So if one of these bones it's orientated in a different direction, then it's going to behave in that different direction because these bones are rotating based around their local axis. So probably what's happening is this bone's x-axis is different than this bone's, or its rotation axis. So let's hit tab to go into edit mode. Let's go over to the armature panel and switch over to axes. And now we can see, and you see exactly that. So this bone here, its y-axis is pointing down, its z-axis is pointing up. This one, its z-axis is pointing back, but its y-axis is pointing up. Or let's see. No. Oh, here we go. So it's the axis shows at the tip. So we can see these two bones, their axes are different. So let's go ahead and just make sure we resolve any of these problems before we get too far along. Let's select all of our bones. We're going to hit Control N and recalculate the roll based on the x-axis. What that means is now the x-axis, or no, excuse me, we want to do, let's see, is it the z-axis? Yeah, I like to do the z-axis. What that means is now the z-axis is basically the one that's pointing forward or back. And now the x-axis, in most cases on these bones, is rotating, or we're rotating around the local x-axis. So if we hit tab to go in edit mode and rotate, say, this bone, and hit R, double tap X, it's going to rotate around that axis. And you can really use any one you want. The main thing is that they're consistent. But you'll notice that this bone and this bone, they're the same, but this bone and this bone are not the same yet. This bone is orientated 180 degrees different, such that its z-axis, rather than pointing forward, it's pointing back, which we don't want. So what we're going to do is we're going to rotate that by using the roll tool. So we can just hit Control R, which allows us to activate roll, and then we can just rotate this around or roll it around. And since we want this to be specific, let's just hit Control R, type in 180, that will flip it around. Now when I rotate this bone, you'll notice that this bone is working just fine. If we go in here, let's first off select this bone. We need to disable, or inherent rotation is disabled, whoops. Let's see, let's double check something. If we go ahead and activate invert on the z-axis, now you can rotate this. You'll notice that it changes. Fantastic. Okay, so let's select this, disable that, and now we can rotate this around. It follows. If we go ahead and set offset here, this allows us to rotate this bone by itself as well. So now I can rotate this around just about like that. But what we might want to do is say, okay, if the hips are rotating over, we only want to rotate them just a little bit, because basically what we want to do is use the hips to just subtly rotate all of the shoulders. So what I can do is select this bone, set its influence down to say 0.5, then select this, or add a constraint to this one. So I'll select the hips, then I'll select the upper spine, hit Control Shift C, add a copy rotation, set it to offset, set it to local space, and local space. And now if I rotate this, you'll notice that the top one rotates a little further than the bottom one. You can see this more precisely if I select this, now rotate it over, you can kind of see what's happening. Now, in some cases, this may not be quite ideal. Or there we go. There, it's working. Cool, so it allows us to get some kind of torso bend in there. So there's all kinds of things that you can do with the constraints. But for the time being, let's leave that where it's at. Next thing that I want to do is go ahead and isolate the hands. So currently, if we rotate the hips like this, or if we grab the hips, the hands do not move. If we rotate this one, the hands don't move either, which can cause some kind of wonky stuff at times. But what if we want the hands to move? Well, let's go ahead and set the parent of the hands to be one of our bones here. So basically, let's go ahead and hit tab to go in edit mode. We're going to select the hands, then select the hips root and hit Control P and keep offset. Now if I rotate the hips, you'll notice that the hands work with it. If I move the hips, the same thing happens. But if I rotate it, we don't really want that. It does give us some interesting results, but really not quite what we want. So let's undo that, and instead, let's go ahead and parent them to the top of the spine. So we'll hit Control P, keep offset, and now if I rotate this, if I rotate this one, you notice that the hands follow. Great. But sometimes we're not going to want the hands to follow, like I said before. So the way that we do this is we select this bone. We're going to remove that parent again by hitting Alt-P in edit mode, and then we're going to add in a child of constraint. So this is the same basic concept, but allows us to control it with a constraint, which allows us to give this an influence control. So let's choose our target is going to be the armature, and the bone is going to be our hips _ root. And then we just need to click Set Inverse. So now if I grab the hips root, my hand follows. But if I select this, set the influence to 0, now my hands don't follow. What this is going to allow us to do, I'm just going to set up the other one just real quickly. So I'll select this one, Control-Shift-C, and child of constraint, and set inverse. All right. So what this is going to allow us to do, though, now that we have this, is it's going to allow us to turn it on and off with a driver. So let's select this, and the drivers are a little funky, but they're very cool. Basically, a driver is going to allow us to control one value with another value. All right, the way that we do this is first let's set up a property. So properties sound very scary because there are these custom properties things where if we select the bone, we can go in, select the bone, click Add Properties. We can go and click Edit and say this is going to be hands _ follow. Very cool, but scary the same thing because what on earth does this mean? There's just a value that now we can play with, but it doesn't do anything. Well, it's going to do anything. Let's just leave this where it's at for the time being, though. Let's go back to the Constraints panel, and under the Influence, we're going to right-click and choose Add Driver. Now, if we go to the Graph Editor here in my other window here, and then switch the mode from F-Curve Editor to Drivers, we now see that we have this list of drivers right here. And we get this line going from left to right, up and down. If we select this and hit N to bring up our Properties panel, we can see these driver settings here. Well, I'm not going to get into too much detail here because I'll just tell you they're confusing. So let me instead just tell you how to set it up and how you'll actually set up most often or most times. First thing, basically, the reason that I say that is very few people in the Blender world actually understand how drivers work, except for some of the developers and or more, script savvy people in the Blender world. But for most of us that are primarily artists, we just mostly know how it works. So I realize that's kind of an excuse, but that's how it is. So what we want to do is from the type, we want to say it's going to be an averaged value. And you can ignore the error for the time being. And then rather than affect the transform channel, we want just a single property because we created our single property over here. So we're going to grab single property. And in the properties type, you can see we have object. Well, you would think that we would go ahead and set this to armature, but that's not actually the case because the property is actually assigned to the armature and the bone, but if we set it to the armature, it doesn't really work. So we're just going to set it to the object and armature. And then in this path here, I know it looks very scary, we want to create or grab basically the data path of that property that we created. So let's go over to the bone panel. And on this path, let's right click on the value and we're going to choose copy data path. If we then go in here, we can go ahead and just hit Control V to paste that in. You see this scary path thing, create pose.bones, arm, IK, hand follow, etc. All right. If we now, you can see we're on the properties are automatically added to our panel right here. But if we go to the constraints panel and we scroll this down, check it out, this value moves. So we're able to control the influence very easily from here. But what this also means is if we select this bone, go over here, add a property to it called hands _ follow, and edit hands _ follow, click OK, and we're going to use the same driver, so we'll grab this one, we're going to right click, copy driver, select this one, right click and paste driver. Now if we grab this, scroll it down, I made a mistake. we're going to delete the properties on this bone. So we'll just delete that. Now if we grab this, scroll it up, we should see the constraint is working. The reason that caused problems by using the properties on both bones is that we now had two different properties both trying to control the same thing, and so it was causing problems. But now we can select this, and it controls the constraint for either one. So rather than putting this on the hand here, let's go ahead and just delete this, and we're going to put it on the hips bone. So we'll add a custom properties. We're going to edit. This is going to be hands_follow. Click OK. And now if we go in here, this actually, we're going to grab this data path. So right click here, copy the data path, go over to this. So here's the driver, and we're going to just paste that. And on this one, it's using the same driver. So it should be the same. Oh, no, it's not. So on this one, we need to go ahead and since we pasted the driver in, we still have to change some things. So we're just going to paste that. And if we update the dependencies, that error goes away. And now let's go ahead and test this. If I move this down and then scroll this back, the hands change. So there we go. So now both constraints are working with the hands. So now I can just move this around and all is fine and dandy. Except we now have another problem. Very, very cool. So, we've got all this stuff that we can now do, but we have a major problem in that his hands are just going wild. Where you can imagine, like, if his hands were sitting on a table and we wanted to just kind of move him up and down with his hands staying in place, this wouldn't work, because we'd have to constantly at every single frame re-rotate his hands to fit. So all we're going to do is we're going to select the hands and we're going to turn off inherent rotation and inherent rotation. And now his hands will stay exactly in place. Unless we happen to go beyond the limits of the IK, then they won't. Very cool. All right, so this is just about it. The last thing that I want to do is just add a copy rotation constraint to his head so that we can turn off the head follow or not. So first on the neck, we're going to turn off the inherent rotation. So if I rotate this, his head does not. If I rotate this, the head follows. And then we're going to go ahead and select this bone, Control-Shift-C, copy rotation. And we're going to go in here, offset, local space, and local space. And now if I rotate this, his head does not follow. I'll go in here, rotate this around, and there's something funky going on. Oh, here we go. The axes are different again. So this one, the Z is pointing out. So this one, Control-R, 180. And this one, Control-R, negative, Control-R, 90? Let's see, I think that's the same then. X, Z, and Y. Yes. So now if I rotate this, then it works. Just like that. Rotate this around. It follows. If I want, I could go ahead and set a copy rotation constraint to this one. Copy rotation. Set it to local space. Local space. By the way, if you hold down Alt, use the scroll, you can scroll through menus. And now if I rotate this, his head kind of follows. I think I turn off inherent rotation there. So now if I rotate this down, it works. Rotate that. Or I can go ahead and under the constraint, turn down the influence. And now I can kind of rotate around with his head. So it just gives you some extra controls. But at this point, that's pretty much it for today. Covered a lot of the... Oh, actually, one last thing, sorry. Right now, you'll notice if we grab the root bone, nothing happens. So what we need to do, grab our hips root and the root, Control-P, keep offset, grab this, and then we're also going to grab each one of our little IK bones like these, all of these, and we're going to set them to the root as well. Keep offset. Now if I rotate this, all works. If I grab this, it works. If I change the hands follow, it works. Yeah, okay, so I believe that's all good to go. All of our IKs work just fine. So that's it. Hope that this was useful. Oh, actually, real quick, we've got some rotation problems on the legs. We want our legs to be perfectly straight such the axes are consistent. So let's just Control-R. That's probably what, 30 degrees? Yeah, approximately 30 degrees like that. And this one, Control-R, 30 degrees. Or maybe a little bit more. Just such that they're right off to the side. All right, this way the axes are rotating like this, not some wonky sideways thing. And I think that will do it. So that's the introduction to character rigging in Blender 2.6. There's a lot more things that we can do with it, including adding custom bone shapes, adding extra controls, adding IK, FK switchers, so you could use an FK arm or an IK arm. All kinds of different things we can do, but I hope that this was a good start. And let me know if you have any questions. Leave questions in the comments, or if you have a problem, feel free to submit a support ticket about the tutorial. And if you're a citizen member or wish to be a citizen member, then you can get access to all the source files, compare the rig, actually look at how the rig is constructed. The citizen memberships are, I think, just a few dollars a month, and give you access to the entire library. So definitely a valuable resource, I think, particularly if you're working through this and can't quite follow something in the tutorial, then getting the source files and being able to compare right to the rig is very helpful. But with that little shameless advertising behind, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.